What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my weekly injury report, so talking about all the players who are questionable, doubtful, and then the guys who have already been ruled out heading into the week 14 games. As always, before I get into the content, if you guys have any fantasy questions, drop those down below. I'll be getting back to every single person, and let's just jump right into the questionable players for this week. So we're going to start it off here with Amari Cooper, who popped up on the injury report with a hip injury. So I'd say here, if Cooper's playing, even dealing with his hip injury, he is someone I would still feel confident playing. Now, if Cooper ends up missing this game, I had Donovan Peoples-Jones as like a back-end wide receiver 3. I think if Cooper is out, this bumps DPJ up into probably like that fringe wide receiver 2 territory, probably like wide receiver 22 to wide receiver 26 range, somewhere in there, just thinking off the top of my head. We also have Saquon Barkley with a neck injury. Now, obviously, if Saquon's active, you're going to be firing him up. However, if Saquon doesn't play, I don't know if this is a spot where we just get, like a backup running back taking over Saquon's workload. They would probably go to some sort of committee. And if that's the case, I would just like to avoid this backfield in general. We have Deontay Johnson with a hip injury. You guys know I love Deontay coming into the season. He is wildly underperformed. You're probably not even starting him for fantasy. I guess if he misses this game, it's a slight bump to George Pickens, but I feel like this offense could just look really, really rough if he is out of the game. We have Trevor Lawrence, who popped on the injury report with a toe injury. With a solid matchup this week, if he is active, I still think he's going to be a very solid start, somewhere in that like QB 10 range. And then we have his wide receiver 2, Zay Jones, dealing with a chest injury. I talked about Zay Jones as someone who I liked as a back-end wide receiver 3 this week. If he's out, I guess maybe you look at Marvin Jones in deeper leagues, but in your standard like 10, 12 leagues, don't be trying to throw Marvin Jones in there, unless you're just wildly desperate. We have Kadarius Toney, who could make his return this week, still dealing with that hamstring injury. Fantasy-wise, I would definitely advise against starting Kadarius Toney this week. He wasn't really able to kind of break away in terms of his role when he was healthy. Now working back from an injury, I would fade him at this point. Maybe he's able to, make a huge impact and help you out for the fantasy playoffs, but definitely someone who has to be on the bench right now. Then we have Kenneth Walker dealing with an ankle injury, and this whole Seattle backfield's kind of all over the place. We've got Walker dealing with the ankle injury. If he plays, you're going to fire him up. But we also have one of his backups, DJ Dallas, dealing with an ankle injury. And then behind those guys, you've got Travis Homer, who will likely take the receiving opportunities. And then you have Tony Jones, who's likely going to filter in on the early downs. So if Walker's out, I think this is going to turn into a full-on committee and one that I would like to avoid for fantasy. Also on that Seahawks team, Will Dissly questionable with a calf injury. Now, Will Dissly on his own is definitely not fantasy relevant, but Will Dissly is the guy who is keeping Noah Fant from being fantasy relevant. So if Will Dissly does not play in this game, I actually think you can fire up Noah Fant as, with how bad the tight end position is, he's probably a mid-tier tight end 1 if Will Dissly does not play in this game. So if you're streaming tight end, definitely something to look out for there with Will Dissly, who could make Noah Fant very viable this week. We have Leonard Fournette dealing with a foot injury. I would expect him to play. If he doesn't, you just fire up Rachaad White with a ton of confidence. For the Patriots, we have Damian Harris dealing with a thigh injury. I really don't think this has a huge impact on Ramondre Stevenson. I guess if Damian Harris is out, it gives Ramondre a slight bump, but he's been fantasy relevant even with Damian Harris in the lineup. So you're not starting Harris, you're starting Ramondre regardless. So pretty much a non-factor for fantasy. We've got Jacoby Myers dealing with a concussion. The Patriots play Monday night, so we don't have the official injury report, but I do not believe he has practiced so far this week. If Myers is out, I guess you could turn to Devonta Parker in deeper leagues, but in like 10, 12 team leagues, I would be avoiding this Pats wide receiver room if Myers does not play. If Myers is good to go, I think you can fire him up as a wide receiver 3. And then in that same game, Rondale Moore dealing with a groin injury. To be totally honest, we've seen Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch both give solid fantasy performances, in that wide receiver 2 role when either D-Hop or Marquise Brown were out. But now that we have D-Hop and Marquise Brown healthy, I'm just not going to be super interested in Rondale Moore or Greg Dortch moving forward. Now we have one fantasy relevant player who is doubtful, and that is Lamar Jackson with that knee injury. So it seems very likely we are going to see Tyler Huntley for the Ravens. And I think Tyler Huntley is a decent fringe quarterback start, probably like a high-end QB2 this week. He has the rushing upside. Offense isn't great, but he can give you points with his legs. And then looking at the players who have already been ruled out, honestly, not a ton of huge big names here. So good to see, fantasy-wise and real-life-wise. We have Hayden Hurst out with a calf. This is something that we kind of knew early on in the week that it seemed like a long shot that he was going to be ready for this game. We have the Texans wide receiver duo of Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks. Collins with the foot, Cooks with the calf. I mean, just avoiding this offense completely, I guess, aside from Dameon Pierce, but this could be a really, really gross showing out of this offense. Unfortunately, Treylon Burks did not clear concussion protocol. Wasn't really expecting it with, how bad of a hit he did take. So he's going to miss this week. Hopefully we see him back in week 15 for the fantasy playoffs. Courtland Sutton out with a hamstring injury. This is definitely a bump to Jerry Jeudy, who's, on a bad offense, just going to be given more opportunities with Courtland Sutton out. And then I'm going to talk about Mike Williams here. He is not out, but he was not given an injury designation, which means, you'd expect him to be playing on Sunday. And I think this does shake up the Chargers wide receiver room just a little bit. I think Keenan Allen is pretty much in the same spot, maybe a drop of a slot or two. I think this does have a big impact on Josh Palmer. Now, it's tough to say, to what extent, because we don't know if Mike Williams is going to come in and have the full-on workload. Remember, he has returned from that injury and then re-injured it very early on. So I still think you can play Palmer as a wide receiver 3, but I definitely don't like him as like a top 20, top 24 guy. I think I had him somewhere in that range, prior to knowing Williams was back. And then for Mike Williams, I think he's probably slotting in as a high-end wide receiver 3. There's obviously, going to be some uncertainty in terms of how much he's going to play and if he truly is back to 100%, but I do think you could throw him in there if he is on your roster. So that is going to wrap it up for this injury report. Honestly, felt pretty light compared to some previous weeks, probably due to the 6 teams on bye, but, always good to see when there's not a ton of guys on the injury report. So if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Doing this every single week. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.